Senator Jim DeMint has been a strong defender of conservative values, both in government and in private sectors. In 1983, Senator DeMint started the DeMint Group, a Greenville-based marketing research and strategic planning business. He was elected as a Republican to the first of 3 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives in 1998. DeMint kept his promise to serve only 3 terms, and in 2004, the voters of South Carolina decided to send him to the U.S. Senate. His reputation as one of Washington's most principled conservative leaders grew while in the Senate. And I have to say, after Senator Helms left, he was the prophet in the U.S. Senate. It was my privilege to interview him several times back when I was hosting a drive time radio program, and he was the go-to man in the U.S. Senate. In April 2013, Senator DeMint became the president of the Heritage Foundation, and I believe it is the leading think tank in America, and it's helping the conservative movement and the Christian worldview, especially in communicating our values. You can know this about a heritage book, report, or speech. They have the figures right. The footnotes check out. They are committed to absolute excellence, and you see it at every level of their publications, their presentations, and even their office. If you have the privilege to visit there, it's just right down the street from NRB's Capitol Hill office. It was my privilege a few months ago to take our President's Council to the roof of the Heritage building there in D.C., and Senator DeMint began to talk about how to reach the current generation with the conservative and Christian message. And he talked about telling stories. He talked about film. He talked about really how the other side has been convincing people in terms of storytelling and art and beauty. And I thought right then, this is a message we need to hear at NRB. Senator DeMint stands for the principles and values that make America great, and we are delighted to welcome you to NRB15. Let's welcome Senator Jim DeMint. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank all of you. This is quite an honor. Good afternoon. It's great to be here with so many talented people. I really appreciate the presentation from the Kendrick brothers. Really excited about your work. It's fun to meet you in person, and all of you broadcasters and other aspiring filmmakers and probably veteran filmmakers in the room here. It's good for me to be back in Tennessee. Tennessee is my second home. I went to the University of Tennessee. My daughter went to Belmont here in Nashville, and actually I've always wanted to be a country music star and to try out at the Grand Ole Opry. There are probably some talent scouts here tonight, so this might be the opportunity that I've been waiting for all my life. And since I've spent some time in politics, I'm eminently qualified to sing for my audition Garth Brooks' song, "I've Got Friends in Low Places." Washington is a low place. Take my word for it if you haven't spent any time there. But seriously, my experience with stage and screen has mostly been the Senate floor as my stage and Fox News as a screen. But just as an aside, I do know a little bit about real filmmaking after being in the advertising business for over 20 years. We spent a lot of time in Hollywood making commercials. We would spend a week or 2 in pre-production, scouting locations, casting, rehearsing, and then 2 days shooting with huge cameras and real 35mm film. Then another 2 days actually cutting the film and splicing it. And we had to count all the frames so that we could come out to exactly 28 seconds that the networks required for these commercials. And then we'd transfer the film cut to 3/4-inch videotape. We would take it to a lab for color correcting, and then to a sound studio for audio mixing. This was all for a 30-second commercial about a spray cleaner. And then we would take this really happened, the commercial back across the country, only to find out our client thought the hand model should have on a wedding ring. People sometimes ask me what prepared me to deal with senators like Harry Reid. Well, now you know. But after producing 30-second commercials, I cannot imagine the skill and patience required to produce a 2-hour feature film. I understand a little bit more about, it sounds like it's 2 or 3 years of praying and writing. That is hard to imagine. I do understand that having digital cameras and editing has made it a little bit easier maybe than when I was working with it. But I leave the art of good filmmaking to experts like Alex and Stephen, and I appreciate your presentation tonight. But I would like to offer just a little bit of advice about communicating a message to people, whether it's through a 30-second commercial, print ads, brochures, books, articles, speeches, or television sound bites. Some of what I've learned might actually apply to movies. My career didn't start out in Washington, and I didn't run for public office until I was 47 years old. I started out as a salesman. Then I landed a job in an ad agency, and then years later started my own marketing company in Greenville, South Carolina with a $10,000 bank loan and the crazy idea that I could make it in my own business and marketing. It was tough going for a while. My wife and I had 3 kids with another on the way, a mortgage, a car loan. A lot of you already know that story. It took a while for my business to generate enough income to live on. And like so many Americans today, there was always too much month left at the end of our money. But somehow, through faith in divine providence and perhaps an irresponsible amount of faith in myself, we made it, or at least we survived. I couldn't have built my little marketing consulting firm without realizing that making a good sales pitch is about more than reciting facts or having the best product or a captive audience or getting someone to sign on a dotted line. I quickly learned that it was not what you think you're saying, it's what people are actually hearing. And what people hear depends a lot on how they feel about the person speaking to them. Whether I was doing handshake deals with my clients or appealing to the people they were trying to reach, I discovered the person and the personal connection behind the message was sometimes even more important than the message itself. It might be tough to accept for the more philosophically minded folks out there. You know, the ones who know they're right and are always ready to tell you when you're wrong. But most of us are swayed by emotions and our personal experiences. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just means we live our lives based on what we know. We often judge messages and messengers by how they make us feel. And seldom do we make decisions based solely on the cold, hard facts. Touching the heart is important in communications, and I kept this lesson with me when I volunteered to help out an aspiring congressional challenger who was in a supposedly hopeless David and Goliath campaign. But David won. Again, I was suddenly a political genius. And after seeing that an inexperienced regular guy could win a congressional race, years later I decided to run for Congress myself. Most of what I learned about communication in politics, I learned by making mistakes. Reporters can be awful transmitters of any message that varies from sanitized talking points. But those talking points still have to connect with regular people in everyday life. For example, when you're dealing with the government borrowing and spending in the trillions of dollars, sometimes it's hard for normal people, folks whose brains aren't in Washington, D.C., to get a sense of proportion. So it helps to compare government debt to something like maxing out a 5th credit card to pay for a big jacuzzi when you can't even make monthly car payments. Most Americans understand you can't live like that, at least not for very long, which helps them realize that the government can't either, at least not for much longer. People can connect with real-life examples, a little story with a message inside. just like finding a letter in a bottle on the beach. In the fall of 2012, I left the U.S. Senate to become president of the Heritage Foundation. I realized that politics followed the culture, and we were losing the battle for the hearts and minds of the American people. Heritage has a platform to speak to Americans, millions every day. I'm proud to say Heritage is one of the largest and most influential public policy organizations in the nation, in fact, in the world. We're dedicated to building an America where freedom, opportunity, prosperity, and civil society flourish. We believe we can achieve this goal and make life better for every American through conservative policies, ideas, and better communication. That's probably the key at this point. Heritage has been around for 40 years with the right ideas, but we need to communicate these ideas in a better way. We've supplied Congress with the right policy ideas for 40 years, and we're still doing it today. But our big new priority is connecting with the American people in a way that will touch their hearts. I've found at Heritage, just as in business, when I travel the country and reach out to men and women from all backgrounds and personal convictions, that a story often makes the connection, a bridge on which many other truths may later cross. I don't think this is limited to policy and government. I think in many ways sharing the good news about Jesus works the same way. Now, I'd be the last person to compare an economic index or a budget proposal to the gospel. Nothing on earth approaches the wonderful story of God's love and redemption. But storytelling is of great value to Christian communicators and entertainers in any medium. Jesus himself spoke in simple parables many times to help people understand complex truths. We all know that most people don't like being preached to or to be confronted with hard truths. When they hear a sermon coming, they head for the hills. Some things are just hard to sell. As a conservative, I feel like I'm trying to sell vegetables, and the other side is giving away free candy. In the same way, the world is giving away free licenses to seek an endless array of guilt-free indulgences and pleasures. We're giving away God's love, but usually with a lot of small print. So what's our story, really? Most of what I've learned about communicating the gospel, just like with politics, I learned by making a lot of mistakes. I'd give them the 4 spiritual laws, whether they wanted it or not, and I really cared, but I'm not sure that came across. But sometimes it even worked, and so I actually saw firsthand that God can speak through, let's just say, a donkey tonight if he wants to, but Jesus showed us a better way. Jesus said to his disciples, "This is my command, love each other." Jesus explained that their love for each other would bring them to complete unity, and that unity, that visible love for each other, would show the world how much they loved him. Our stories need to show how much people, especially believers, love each other. That's the most attractive force on earth. I grew up without a father, so I loved watching shows like Andy Griffith. Opie would always make mistakes, but Andy would love and forgive him. I wanted to be good and wise like Andy, but I knew I was more like Opie. And as I got older, I realized I was even more like Barney Fife. But Andy loved him too. There was nothing about the Bible on Andy Griffith, but I saw how a father could love a son who makes a lot of mistakes. And that's the story of the gospel for me. There are a lot of ways to tell a good love story. The great Christian writer C.S. Lewis said that good stories participate in the story of salvation, whether or not they are written that way by virtue of the fact that they are good. Scripture tells us of joy and sorrow, agony and ecstasy in their truest and most important forms. Any one of these themes, if captured authentically in a film where love rescues and overcomes, will open hearts and minds to understand that we have the ability to love each other because God first loved us. That's when the religious themes, whether they're explicit or implicit, can really grab the viewer. Not because someone is hitting them over the head, but because the viewers will be drawn to figure it out for themselves. Here's something C.S. Lewis wrote in the New York Times in 1956. I first read it when I was 5 years old. I didn't really read it. Others responding to the questions about how he came up with his stories, Lewis wrote, and I quote, "Some people seem to think that I began by asking myself, how could I say something about Christianity to children? Then fixed on the fairy tale as an instrument, then collected information about child psychology and decided what age group I'd write for. Then drew up a list of basic Christian truths and hammered out allegories to embody them. This is all pure moonshine. I couldn't write in that way at all. Everything began with images, a fawn carrying an umbrella, a queen on a sledge, a magnificent lion. At first, there wasn't even anything Christian about them. That element pushed itself in of its own accord." End quote. Lewis sums up that successful evangelism through art was to make something that's enjoyable in its own right, and the lessons will flow through without being forced. There are many examples of this being done very well in recent mainstream films, and a few that were questionable, such as the movie Gran Torino from a few years back. I had a Gran Torino in the early 70s, so the title attracted me, and I love Clint Eastwood. The language was so foul I shouldn't admit to seeing it in Christian company. But for the record, I saw it only for research purposes. Now, Clint Eastwood, for those of you who didn't see it, plays an old crotchety widower and Korean War veteran whose racist language and rude exterior were directed at his Asian neighbors and their extended family who were constantly crowding the house and the front porch. Clint sat on his front porch drinking beer and grumbling about them. But the more he complained and told them to leave him alone, the more they loved him and invited him into their lives. There were subplots of sin, forgiveness, redemption, but the story was about love overcoming evil. Before the movie was over, Clint gave his life for his new friends and left his Gran Torino to the young boy who lived next door, instead of giving it to his own granddaughter who really wanted it, but had never given him the time of day. There are many better movies, and we've heard about them tonight, with more explicit spiritual messages, and which are real important. But as our friends have told us, that we need to have a multi-pronged approach to reaching the world. The data shows that wholesome movies with a moral theme are consistently more successful and profitable than the countercultural movies that tear at the moral fabric and values of our nation. So the motive for producing what we're getting out of Hollywood is certainly not money-making, at least not all of it. So let's keep telling good stories. The good story may be thrilling, it may bring us to tears. A good story may be romantic or scary or funny or inspiring. All of these have an opportunity to spread the gospel message, for they're all contained within the greatest love story of all. I urge you to keep up the good work and keep perfecting your craft. Most of all, think about what kinds of stories we can tell which will write the gospel on the hearts of those who see them, whether or not they're aware at the time. A film can deal with falsehood, evil, ugliness, but if it does it well, it can be a pathway to the author of all truth, goodness, beauty, and the greatest of these, love. It's inspiring to be here with so many talented, devout people who are building these pathways every day. Thank you all, and God bless.